The coho history on the Klamath River. To date, the historical records do not account for coho salmon being native to the Klamath River. When Fish and Game are challenged, they cannot substantiate that coho were ever native to the Klamath. The official records indicate that coho were first planted in 1895, 1899, multiple times in the 60s, and again in the 80s. The salmon kill in 2002 was attributed to toxic algae from the reservoirs. A CDC investigation proved that the reservoirs were non-toxic. Del Norte, Humboldt, and Siskiyou County Sheriff's Departments and the California Conservation Corps believe that the 2002 kill was caused by a methamphetamine dump. Coho landings in the state of California. It would appear that prior to multiple coho plantings in the 60s, coho productions were pretty poor at best. With the multiple plantings, there was a historic rise, which didn't last long. Based on the history of the coho, it confirms that planting of coho is a failed experiment and should not be listed as an endangered species. With the planting of salmonids in California in 1895 and multiple subsequent plantings in addition to the erection of dams and hatcheries in the Pacific Northwest, by 1950 the total landings of all species of salmonids was 149,000 metric tons, with 80% caught in Alaskan waters. With continued hatchery production, in 2007 the total landings was 403,000 metric tons in the Pacific Northwest, with 97% caught in Alaskan waters. From the standpoint of commercial fishing, the production of salmonids is a positive human intervention with a 273% increase since 1950. However, the serious decline of commercial salmonid production in the states of California, Oregon, and Washington have been attributed to the very human intervention that has proved successful for commercial salmonid production for over 100 years. At present, Fish and Wildlife, Fish and Game, and environmental NGOs are proposing removal of dams and hatcheries, which they theorize that salmonids will return to historic spawning grounds and increase production. The reality is that without dams and hatcheries, there would be little salmonid production in the Pacific Northwest, as historic data demonstrates. An in-depth study of river and ocean conditions has been undertaken, and it must be noted there has been a historic rise in the temperature of the Pacific Ocean, driving cold water salmonids north into Alaskan waters. Since the 1700s, we have not seen such a warming of the Pacific Ocean, and the graphic representation clearly illustrates a historic rise since the early 1970s. In an attempt to understand this temperature rise, it was discovered that there's been a comparable rise in the Ring of Fire volcanic activity since the early 1970s. It was also discovered that planetary earthquake activity and heat content of the Pacific Ocean have also increased dramatically since the early 1970s. The graphic representation stated clearly, there is no foundation for theorizing that removal of dams or hatcheries will restore salmonids in California, Oregon, and Washington states. In recent months, Fish and Wildlife, Fish and Game, and environmental NGOs have theorized that increases in the Caspian Tern in the Columbia Basin in the state of Oregon has been a causative factor in decreased salmonid production as they predate upon salmonid smolts. Salmonids compose 73 to 90% of the Caspian Tern's diet. Rather than considering thinning of the tern population, they are proposing relocating some of them throughout Washington, Oregon, Idaho, California, and Nevada. The rationale behind this proposal is insanity, as the relocating and building of new habitats for the tern would seriously affect present ecosystems, in addition to allowing them to continue populating new areas for these predatory birds. As has previously been presented, the causative factor in decreased commercial salmonid production in Washington, Oregon, and California is the increased warming of the Pacific Ocean, driving cold water salmonids north into Alaskan waters. Another aspect of the salmonid controversy is that with the increased numbers of salmonids in Alaskan waters, there is concern that there are too great a number of them and that there may not be enough food for these increased numbers, and they are proposing that perhaps hatcheries should be shut down or seriously decrease their production. Conclusions. The decrease of salmonid populations in California, Oregon, and Washington states is as a direct result of a historic rise in the Pacific Ocean temperature, driving salmonids north into Alaskan waters. Removal of dams and hatcheries and relocation of Caspian terns will not restore salmonid fisheries. It is apparent that temperature rise in the Pacific Ocean, volcanic activity increase in the Pacific Ring of Fire, global earthquake activity, and increased heat content of the Pacific Ocean are the result of planetary cycle, and dams or hatcheries cannot be blamed for reduced salmon runs in Washington, Oregon, and California. Thank you for listening.